I'm Hazel, 38 female. I live in a quiet suburban town in a house I bought myself, work as a senior data analyst, and have always believed that family is the most important thing. I don't have children of my own, so my sister's daughter, Olivia, has always been the apple of my eye. I thought my generosity was a way of showing love, but I was about to learn that for some people, generosity is just a weakness to be exploited. This is the story of how a single, ugly moment at a family lunch revealed a rot that had been growing for years, and how I was forced to perform the most painful, but necessary, surgery of my life, cutting a part of my family out for good. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The tradition of Sunday lunch at my mom Megan's house was something I once cherished. It was a constant in a world that always seemed to be changing. The scent of roasted chicken, the familiar clutter on the countertops, the slightly too loud television in the living room, it was the backdrop of my life. For years, these gatherings were a source of comfort. Lately, however, they had started to feel different. There was an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. A subtle shift in the atmosphere that left a bitter taste in my mouth, one that had nothing to do with my mom's cooking. My sister Teresa and her husband Noah would arrive with their daughter Olivia, and the dynamic would change instantly. Teresa, who worked as a receptionist at a local dental office, had a way of speaking that was laced with thinly veiled barbs, usually directed at me. She'd compliment my new car by saying, "It must be nice not having to worry about money for a family," or comment on my work trips with a sigh, "I'd love to travel, but of course, my priorities are different." Each comment was a tiny paper cut, small and insignificant on its own, but they were starting to accumulate. Noah would just stand by her side, chuckling and nodding, a passive enabler to her quiet campaign of resentment. I did well for myself. As a senior data analyst, I had worked hard, made smart choices, and built a comfortable life. I didn't have a husband or kids, a fact Teresa loved to remind me of, framing it as a lack rather than a choice. But because of my position, I was able to be generous, especially with my niece, Olivia. When Teresa and Noah mentioned they were struggling to afford the tuition for Northwood Academy, the best private school in our county, I didn't hesitate. I wanted Olivia to have every opportunity. So, for the past 2 years, I had been transferring $1,000 to Teresa's account on the first of every month, specifically for Olivia's education. It was a significant amount, but I never once regretted it. Seeing Olivia's school photos, hearing about her achievements, it made it all worthwhile. I saw it as an investment in her future, and by extension, an investment in our family. But Olivia was changing. At 12, she was starting to echo her mother's attitudes. The sweet little girl who used to run to hug me the moment I walked in was now more reserved, almost dismissive. She'd greet me with a mumbled hi before disappearing with her phone. I chalked it up to preteen angst, a phase that would eventually pass. I told myself that her mother's influence wasn't seeping in as deeply as I feared. I was wrong. The Sunday it all fell apart started like any other. I arrived at my mom's house around noon, carrying a dessert I'd picked up from a nice bakery downtown. The earrings I wore were a recent gift to myself, a beautiful pair of aquamarine studs set in white gold. They weren't extravagantly expensive, but they were elegant, and they were from a designer I admired. They represented a milestone, a bonus I'd received for leading a successful project at work. They were special to me. Teresa noticed them immediately. "Oh, new earrings, Hazel," she said, her eyes scanning them with an appraiser's coldness. Before I could answer, she added, "Trying to impress someone?" I just smiled and shook my head, refusing to take the bait. "No, just a little something for myself." We sat down to eat, and the conversation was the usual mix of neighborhood gossip from my mom and complaints about work from Noah. I tried to ask Olivia about school, but she gave one-word answers, her eyes glued to her screen. The tension was a low hum in the room, a familiar vibration I had learned to ignore for the sake of peace. But ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. It only gives it room to grow, to fester until it bursts. and the dam was about to break. After we finished eating, Olivia came over to my side of the table, ostensibly to look at my phone, but her eyes were fixed on my ears. "Those are pretty," she said, her tone flat and unconvincing. "Thanks, honey," I replied, genuinely. Why pleased by the rare compliment? It felt like a small breakthrough, a glimpse of the sweet girl I knew was still in there somewhere. Then she reached up and touched one of the earrings. Her fingers were surprisingly rough as she pinched the stone. "Mom says they're cheap knockoffs," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Her voice was loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. The air went still. I looked from Olivia's blank face to Teresa, who was watching with a smirk. She didn't deny it. She didn't correct her daughter. She just sat there, a smug look of satisfaction on her face. My heart sank. It wasn't about the earrings, it was the casual cruelty, the fact that my sister was teaching her daughter to be just as spiteful and jealous as she was. It was the poison she was actively feeding her child, directed squarely at me. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. My mom, Megan, looked distressed, opening her mouth to say something but then closing it again, a helpless expression on her face. Noah just grunted and took a big gulp of his drink, avoiding eye contact. In that moment, I felt profoundly alone. It was me against them, and I was just beginning to realize this wasn't a new dynamic. It had been this way for a long, long time. The cracks in the facade of our happy family were no longer just visible. They were splitting wide open, revealing the ugly truth underneath. The silence that followed Olivia's pronouncement was deafening. It felt like the world had slowed down, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway booming like a drum. I stared at my niece, this child I adored who had just delivered her mother's venomous words with such unnerving calm. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "What did you say, Olivia?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I was giving her a chance to take it back, to say she was joking. I was praying she would. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. A flicker of something defiance, maybe even malice, flashed in her eyes. It was a look I recognized all too well from her mother. "Mom said you buy fake stuff to look rich," she repeated, her voice clearer this time, more confident. "She said your purse is probably from a street vendor." I turned my gaze to Teresa. My sister's smirk had widened into a full-blown grin. There was no shame, no remorse, there was only triumph. She was proud of her daughter, proud of this little performance of cruelty. Noah let out a short, sharp laugh, as if Olivia had just told the cleverest joke in the world. "Kids say the darndest things, right?" He chuckled, raising his glass in a mock toast. My mom, Megan, looked horrified. "Teresa, Olivia, that is a horrible thing to say," she stammered, her hands fluttering nervously. "Apologize to your aunt right now." But Teresa just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, relax, Mom. Hazel can take a joke." "Can't you, Hazel?" she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. It wasn't a joke. It was a calculated attack, and Olivia was her chosen weapon. Before I could even process a response, Olivia's fingers, which were still toying with my earring, tightened. I felt a sharp pinch on my earlobe. "Olivia, let go," I said, my voice firm, but she didn't. She pulled, her expression turning into a grimace of concentration. And then, with a horrifyingly distinct snap, the world came crashing down. She had broken it. She had snapped the delicate white gold post right off the back of the aquamarine stud. The main part of the earring clattered onto the table, while the broken post was still pinched between her fingers. She looked at it, then at me, her eyes wide. For a second, I thought I saw fear, a realization of what she'd done. But then she looked at her parents. Noah was roaring with laughter now, slapping his knee as if he were watching a comedy show. "Wow, kid's got a grip," he howled. Teresa was laughing too, a high, piercing sound that cut right through me. She covered her mouth in a parody of shock, but her eyes were dancing with glee. That's when Olivia's expression changed. The fear vanished, replaced by the same smug pride I saw on her mother's face. She dropped the broken piece of my earring onto the table and shrugged. "Guess it really was cheap," she said. The laughter from Teresa and Noah echoed in the dining room. It felt like they were laughing at more than just a broken piece of jewelry. They were laughing at me. At my life, my choices, my generosity. They were laughing at the $1,000 I sent them every single month. They were laughing at the fact that I was paying for the private school that was supposed to be teaching this child character and discipline, only to have her sit here and act like a spoiled, cruel brat, encouraged by her equally awful parents. My mom's pleas for them to stop were completely ignored. She looked at me, her eyes filled with apology and helplessness, but she was powerless against the tide of their mockery. Something inside me fractured in that moment, something far more valuable than a white gold earring. It was the last thread of hope I had for my relationship with my sister. It was the naive belief that my love and support would one day be met with gratitude instead of resentment. The sound of their laughter, the sight of my broken earring on the table, it was a brutal, clarifying moment. I slowly stood up from the table. My hands were shaking, but my voice was eerily calm when I spoke. "I think I should go," I said. Teresa finally stopped laughing, wiping a tear from her eye. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Hazel. It's just an earring. I'll buy you a new one. I'm sure I can find the same one at the mall kiosk." The condescension was suffocating. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at any of them. I picked up the 2 pieces of my earring from the table, my fingers closing around the cold, broken metal. I walked out of the dining room, grabbed my purse and keys from the hall table, and left without another word. As I closed the front door behind me, I could still hear Noah's fading laughter. It was the sound of disrespect. It was the sound of an ending. And as I sat in my car, the silence finally enveloping me, I knew that this was not just about a broken earring. This was about a broken family, and I was the only one who had been refusing to see it. The financial support, the love, the effort, it was all a one-way street, and that street had just come to a dead end. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and storefronts that I didn't truly see. My mind was replaying the scene at the lunch table over and over, a looped movie of humiliation. The snap of the earring, Olivia's smug face, Teresa and Noah's cruel laughter, it was all seared into my brain. By the time I walked through my own front door, the shock had begun to recede, replaced by a cold, hard anger. It was an anger so pure and clarifying that it felt like a splash of icy water to the face. For years, I had made excuses for them. Teresa's just stressed. Noah has a weird sense of humor. Olivia's just a kid. But there were no more excuses left. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern of behavior, a culture of disrespect that I had been funding. I sat on my sofa, the 2 broken pieces of my earring resting on the coffee table in front of me. They looked so small and pathetic, a symbol of my own foolishness. The words Olivia had said echoed in my head. "Mom says they're cheap knockoffs. Mom said you buy fake stuff to look rich." Where would Teresa get such an idea? I had never been flashy with my money. I lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. I drove a reliable sedan, not a luxury sports car. My house was nice, but it wasn't a mansion. The only person I was truly extravagant with was Olivia. That thought hit me like a ton of bricks. The $1,000 every month for her private school. Was that where the resentment was coming from? Did Teresa see my ability to provide for her daughter not as a gift, but as a judgment on her own inability to do so? My phone buzzed. It was my mom. I ignored it. A few minutes later, a text came through. "Hazel, I am so sorry. What they did was unforgivable. Please call me." I appreciated her sentiment, but I wasn't ready to talk. I knew she would try to smooth things over, to plead for me to forgive and forget for the sake of family. But that was the problem. I had been doing that for years, and it had only enabled their behavior to get worse. Another text came in. This time it was from Teresa. My heart hammered against my ribs. I almost deleted it without reading, but a morbid curiosity took over. I opened it. "Seriously, you left because of a stupid earring? Grow up. Olivia feels terrible." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that I almost laughed. Olivia hadn't felt a shred of remorse. I had seen her face. She had felt victorious. Teresa wasn't sorry. She was annoyed that I had ruined her fun by being sensitive. This text was the final confirmation I needed. There was no misunderstanding here. There was no love, no respect. I was not their sister or their aunt. I was their bank. I was a resource to be tapped, a convenience to be used, and a target for their bitterness. The thought of that 10,000 leaving my account in just a few days, on the 1st of the month, made me physically ill. The money I worked so hard for, money that was supposed to be building Olivia's future, was instead funding a household that held me in complete contempt. A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through the anger. Was the money even going to the school? The question seemed to come out of nowhere, but once it took root, I couldn't shake it. I had always just transferred the money directly to Teresa's personal checking account. I had trusted her. I had never asked for receipts or a tuition statement. Why would I? She was my sister. Now, sitting in the quiet of my living room, that trust felt like the most naive thing in the world. As a data analyst, my entire career was built on verification. I dealt in facts, in numbers that told a story. I never took anything at face value. I always checked the source. Yet in my personal life, with the person who mattered most, I had operated on blind faith. It was time to apply my professional skills to my personal life. It was time to investigate. I pulled my laptop onto my lap, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I started with Northwood Academy's website. I navigated to the admissions and tuition page. My eyes scanned the figures for the current academic year. I found the tuition schedule for a 7th grade day student. My breath caught in my throat. The annual tuition was $9,600. I did the math quickly in my head. That broke down to $800 per month over a 12-month payment plan. I was sending Teresa $1,000 a month. For 2 years, that was $200 extra every single month, for 24 months. A total of $4,800 that was unaccounted for. Where was that money going? My mind raced. Maybe there were other fees. Books, uniforms, activity fees. I dug deeper into the school's website. They had a detailed breakdown. Books were a one-time fee of $350 at the beginning of the year. The technology fee was $200. Uniforms were purchased separately from a third-party vendor. Even if I were generous and factored in sports or club fees, it wouldn't come close to a consistent $200 extra every single month. My heart started to pound. This wasn't a simple overestimation. This was deliberate. Teresa had lied to me about the cost of tuition. She had been skimming off the top of my generosity for 2 straight years. The disrespect wasn't just in their words and their laughter. It was in their bank account. It was a cold, calculated, monthly theft disguised as a family need. The anger I felt before was nothing compared to the icy rage that now filled me. This wasn't just about a broken earring anymore. It was about a profound and sustained betrayal, and my quiet investigation had just begun. The discovery that Teresa had inflated the tuition cost was the first domino to fall. It sent a shockwave through my understanding of our entire arrangement. For 2 years, I had pictured my money going into a dedicated fund for Olivia's education, a noble purpose. Now, I had to confront the ugly reality that at least some of it was being siphoned off for Teresa and Noah's personal use. That extra $200 a month, $400 a year, wasn't just a rounding error. It was a vacation, it was designer clothes, it was expensive dinners. It was a lifestyle subsidized by my love for my niece and by my sister's deception. The truth was in the numbers, and the numbers didn't lie. My investigation couldn't stop there. If she was willing to lie about the amount, what else was she lying about? The most direct way to find out the truth was to go straight to the source. But calling Northwood Academy and asking about a student's payment history felt like a massive overstep, and they likely wouldn't give me that information due to privacy policies. I needed a different approach. I needed irrefutable proof, something I could look at with my own 2 eyes. My mind immediately went to the online banking portal. Years ago, when my mom had a health scare, she had added me as an authorized user to her accounts, just in case she needed help managing her finances. I rarely ever logged in, as she was perfectly capable, but I still had the credentials. I knew for a fact that my mom, in her own quiet way, often helped Teresa out with bills. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a clue there. With a deep sense of guilt warring with my need for the truth, I logged into my mom's online banking. I felt like a spy in my own family. I navigated to the transaction history, my eyes scanning for any payments made to Teresa or Northwood Academy. I didn't find any direct payments to the school, which wasn't surprising, but I did find regular transfers to Teresa. Small amounts here and there, $50 for groceries, $100 for a utility bill. My mom had a huge heart and lived on a modest retirement income, but she would give her last dollar to her children if they needed it. Then I saw it, a recurring transfer. It was a $300 payment sent to Teresa on the 28th of every month. The memo line read, "For Olivia." My blood ran cold. I scrolled back. It had been happening for over a year. I pulled up a calculator. My $1,000 a month, plus my mom's $300 a month, totaled $1,300. Teresa was collecting $1,300 every month for a tuition bill that was, at most, $800. She was pocketing a surplus of $500 every single month. My own mother, who I knew worried about making her own savings last, was being manipulated into giving away money under the false pretense that her granddaughter's schooling was in jeopardy. Teresa wasn't just stealing from me, she was exploiting our retired mother. The rage that filled me was so intense it made me dizzy. This was beyond petty resentment. This was a systematic, calculated fraud perpetrated against her own family. I needed more. I needed to see where the money was going. The thought was intrusive, but I couldn't stop it. Social media. Teresa and Noah were both avid posters. I rarely checked their feeds as they were usually filled with vague inspirational quotes or complaints disguised as humble brags. But now I opened up my laptop and began to scroll, looking at their history with new, suspicious eyes. It didn't take long to find the evidence. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. There was a weekend trip to a boutique hotel on the coast from 3 months ago. A much-needed getaway, Teresa had captioned it. The dates coincided perfectly with the end of the month, right after my money and my mom's money would have hit her account. There was Noah showing off a brand-new, top-of-the-line grill in their backyard. "My new baby," he had written. I knew for a fact his job as a logistics coordinator wasn't paying for that kind of equipment. Then I saw the photos of Olivia. She was dressed head to toe in designer athletic wear that cost hundreds of dollars per outfit. She had the latest phone, a new gaming console, expensive-looking headphones. These weren't the necessities of a private school education. This was extravagance, and it was all funded by me and my mother. The most damning evidence, however, was a photo from last summer. It was a picture of Teresa showing off a new designer handbag. It was the exact style I had been admiring for months but had decided was too much of a splurge for myself. I remembered mentioning it to her in passing. She had scoffed at the time, saying, "Who spends that much on a purse?" And there she was, holding it, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Decided to treat myself, you only live once. Blessed." I felt sick. The timeline matched. She had bought it just days after my July payment had gone through. My money. The money I earned by working 60-hour weeks on stressful projects. The money I had earmarked for my niece's future. It had been turned into a leather status symbol for the sister who mocked me for buying fake stuff to look rich. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture of greed, jealousy, and breathtaking entitlement. They weren't struggling. They were living a lie. They had built a lifestyle on a foundation of my generosity and their deception. The disrespect at the lunch table wasn't a random outburst. It was the symptom of a much deeper disease. They felt entitled to my money, and they resented me for having it to give. They didn't see my contribution as a gift. They saw it as their due. The numbers on the screen and the photos on their social media feeds told the whole ugly story. The truth was out. And the truth demanded action. The evidence was all there, laid out across my laptop screen like a case file for the prosecution. The inflated tuition, the siphoned funds from our mother, the lavish spending documented on social media. There was no ambiguity, no room for excuses or misunderstandings. I had been the victim of a long-term, calculated financial deception by my own sister. The anger I felt was still there, a white-hot coal in my chest, but it was now accompanied by a profound sense of clarity. The path forward was obvious. The Bank of Hazel was officially closed. My first and most immediate task was to stop the next payment. The first of the month was only 2 days away. I logged into my online banking portal, my heart a steady, determined drum against my ribs. I navigated to the section for recurring payments and transfers. There it was, listed in plain black and white, Monthly transfer to Teresa last name. Amount, $1,000. Next payment date, October 1st. I stared at the entry for a long moment. For 24 months, clicking a button to approve this transfer had felt like an act of love. It felt like I was building a bridge to my niece's future. Now, I saw it for what it was, a pipeline of my hard-earned money flowing directly into a sinkhole of deceit and entitlement. With a single, decisive click, I selected the transfer and hit the delete button. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this recurring payment? I clicked yes without a flicker of hesitation. A small notification appeared at the top of the screen. Your recurring payment has been successfully canceled. It was done. The financial cord had been cut, a wave of awe. A leaf washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It felt like I had just shed a massive weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying. But stopping my own payment was only half the battle. I couldn't, in good conscience, allow Teresa to continue exploiting our mother. This was the more delicate part of the plan. I didn't want to cause my mom distress or drag her into the middle of a war between her daughters. But she deserved to know the truth. She deserved to know that her sacrifices were not funding her granddaughter's education, but her other daughter's shopping sprees. I called her that evening. Her voice was full of worry when she answered. Hazel, I've been so worried. Are you okay? I'm okay, Mom, I said, my voice even. But I need to talk to you about something important. Are you sitting down? I calmly and methodically laid out everything I had discovered. I started with the incident at lunch, not to rehash the hurt, but to establish the pattern of disrespect. Then, I told her about the real cost of Northwood Academy's tuition. I could hear her sharp intake of breath over the phone. I told her about the $200 surplus Teresa had been skimming from me every month. Finally, with a heavy heart, I told her about the $300 she had been sending. I explained that with her contribution, Teresa was pocketing a total of $500 every single month. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When my mom finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Oh, Hazel, I had no idea. She sounded heartbroken, not just by the deception, but by the fact that she had been an unwitting part of it. She told me they were barely making ends meet, she whispered. She said the school was threatening to kick Olivia out if they missed a payment. The manipulation was even deeper than I thought. Teresa had been playing on our mother's deepest fears. She lied to you, Mom, I said gently. I saw photos of them. They're taking trips, buying designer things. They are not struggling. They are using us. I told her that I had already canceled my monthly payment permanently. I didn't tell her what to do, but I laid the facts before her so she could make her own informed decision. I just wanted you to know the truth, I finished. What you do with it is up to you. We talked for another hour. My mom cried, a mixture of anger and sadness. She felt foolish, she said, for being so easily tricked. I reassured her that she wasn't foolish. She was loving and trusting, and Teresa had taken advantage of those beautiful qualities. By the end of the call, her tears had dried, replaced by a quiet resolve that reminded me of my own. Thank you for telling me, Hazel, she said, her voice stronger now. You did the right thing. I need to think about this, but I won't be taken for a fool anymore. I knew she would cancel her payment too. The quiet severance was complete. All sources of unearned income had been terminated. There would be no fanfare, no dramatic announcement. Just a sudden, stark silence in Teresa's bank account on the first of the month. She wouldn't know it yet. She was likely still basking in the glow of her victory at Sunday lunch. But the consequences were already in motion. The bill for her disrespect was coming due. It wouldn't arrive in an envelope or an email. It would arrive in the form of a missing $1,300 and the deafening silence that followed. The plan wasn't about revenge in the explosive sense. It was about the simple, powerful act of turning off the tap. Sometimes, the most effective consequence isn't a loud confrontation, but the quiet removal of the support that entitled people have long taken for granted. The first few days after I cut the financial cord were strangely silent. October 1st came and went. I imagined Teresa checking her bank account, expecting to see my $1,000 deposit. I pictured the confusion turning to annoyance, then to panic. I didn't hear a word from her on the first or the second. I knew she wouldn't call me immediately. Her pride wouldn't allow it. She would assume it was a mistake, a delay in the bank's processing. She would try to maintain the illusion that she didn't desperately need my money, that its arrival wasn't the most important financial event of her month. The call finally came on the evening of October 3rd. I was in my kitchen making dinner when my phone rang, flashing Teresa on the screen. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and answered, putting the phone on speaker and placing it on the counter. "Hello, Teresa," I said, my voice neutral. "Hey," she said. Her tone was casual, but it was stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. "So, weird question, but did you forget something a couple of days ago?" There it was. The passive-aggressive opener. Not a direct question, but an accusation disguised as a gentle reminder. She was giving me an opportunity to apologize, to claim I had forgotten, to save her the embarrassment of having to ask for what she believed was hers. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. "I don't think so," I replied calmly, continuing to chop vegetables. "Why do you ask?" I could hear her exhale sharply on the other end. The pretense of casualness was evaporating. "The school money, Hazel," she said, her voice rising in frustration. "The tuition payment. It didn't come through. I've been getting nasty emails from Northwood's billing department." This was almost certainly a lie, designed to make me feel guilty. The school wouldn't be sending nasty emails 2 days after a payment was due. But I let her continue. "Oh," I said simply. The silence that followed was heavy with her unspoken demand. Finally, SH. "E broke, so are you going to send it or what? It was due on the 1st. I don't want Olivia to get in trouble because you forgot." The sheer entitlement in her voice was staggering. Because you forgot. She was framing my deliberate action as a careless mistake on my part that was negatively impacting her and her child. It was time to set the record straight. "It wasn't a mistake, Teresa," I said, my voice cold and clear. "I didn't forget. I canceled the payment." There was a beat of stunned silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to process what I had just said. What? You canceled it. Why would you do that?" "I think you know why," I replied. "We can start with what happened at Sunday lunch, with what you encouraged your daughter to say and do, or we can talk about the fact that you've been lying to me for 2 years. "Lying?" she shrieked, her voice escalating into a full-blown yell. "What are you talking about? I have never lied to you." "Really?" I said, my calm demeanor infuriating her even more. "Northwood's tuition is $800 a month, Teresa. I know because I looked it up. You've been taking an extra $200 from me every month for 2 years. And then there's the $300 you've been getting from Mom, telling her you were struggling when you were really using our money to buy designer bags and go on weekend getaways." The silence on the other end was absolute. I had laid all the cards on the table. There was no room for her to maneuver, no space for her to create a false narrative. I had the facts. How did you?" she stammered. "You went behind my back, you spied on me?" "I verified," I corrected her. "Something I should have done a long time ago. You taught your daughter to disrespect me, to destroy my property, and to mock me. You did that while you were stealing from me and our mother. The arrangement is over, Teresa, permanently." The dam of her composure burst completely. She launched into a tirade, a screaming, incoherent rant that was a mixture of insults, threats, and self-pity. She called me a jealous, lonely old maid. She said I was trying to ruin her life because I had nothing better to do. She claimed I was punishing Olivia for a childish mistake. "How could you do this to your own niece?" she screamed. "Her education, her future, it's all on you now. You're going to get her kicked out of school." "No, Teresa," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "Her education is on you and her father, her parents. It always has been. My help was a gift, one you took for granted and abused. Gifts can be taken away." I could hear Noah in the background now, yelling something I couldn't make out. The fallout was happening in real time. Teresa's voice dropped to a hiss. "You will regret this, Hazel. You think you're so high and mighty with your fancy job and your quiet little house. But you have no one. We are your family. And you just threw it all away over a stupid earring and a few dollars." "It was never about the earring, and it was never about the money," I said softly. "It was about the respect you never had for me. The payments are over. Don't call me about this again." And with that, I hung up the phone. I stood in the silence of my kitchen, my heart pounding, but my mind was clear. The inevitable fallout had been messy and loud, just as I had expected, but it was also liberating. The final tie of obligation had been severed. The storm had finally broken. The days following the explosive phone call with Teresa were quiet. I had expected a further onslaught, angry texts, voicemails, perhaps even an unannounced visit. But there was nothing. It was a silence that spoke volumes. It told me they had no defense for their actions, only rage that their deception had been uncovered and their cash flow terminated. The silence was also a relief. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel a low-level dread in anticipation of the next family gathering, the next backhanded compliment, the next subtle dig. The toxic cloud had lifted. My mom called me a day after my confrontation with Teresa. She told me Teresa had called her too, screaming and crying, trying to manipulate her into intervening on her behalf. But my mom, armed with the truth, had stood her ground. "I told her I knew everything, Hazel," my mom said, a new strength in her voice. "I told her I was disappointed and ashamed, and I told her that my payments were stopping as well." She hung up on me. It was a painful conversation for her, I knew, but it was also a necessary one. For the first time, my mom wasn't trying to play the peacekeeper between her two daughters. She was drawing a line against unacceptable behavior. She was choosing integrity over the illusion of family harmony. A week later, I received an email. It was from the headmaster of Northwood Academy. My heart skipped a beat. Had Teresa done something drastic? I opened it with trepidation. The email was surprisingly polite. It was addressed to me, explaining that my sister had provided my contact information. It stated that the tuition for October had not been paid, and that if it wasn't settled, Olivia would be unenrolled at the end of the month. It went on to say that Teresa and Noah had informed the school they could no longer afford the tuition, and had asked if I, as Olivia's aunt, would be willing to assume financial responsibility directly. They had thrown me under the bus one last time, trying to make me look like the villain who was pulling the plug on a child's education. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about Olivia, the sweet little girl she once was, and the person her parents were turning her into. Was it her fault? Not entirely. But she was old enough to know that what she had said and done was wrong, and bailing her out now would teach her nothing. It would only reinforce the lesson her parents had taught her, that actions have no consequences, that Aunt Hazel is a walking ATM who will always be there to clean up their messes. I typed out a polite, professional reply to the headmaster. I wrote, "Thank you for reaching out. While I wish my niece all the best in her academic pursuits, I will not be assuming financial responsibility for her tuition. That responsibility lies with her parents. Sincerely, Hazel." I hit send, and with that final act, I closed the book on that chapter of my life. I knew the consequences. Olivia would have to leave Northwood and enroll in the local public school, which, for the record, was a perfectly good school. Teresa and Noah would have to adjust their lifestyle to one they could actually afford. They would, no doubt, paint me as the cruel, heartless villain in this story to anyone who would listen. And I had to be okay with that, because I knew the truth. In the months that followed, my life became much more peaceful. The Sunday lunches at my mom's house changed. At first, it was just the two of us. We'd talk for hours, reconnecting in a way we hadn't been able to in years, without the tension and negativity that Teresa and her family brought. We started new traditions, trying new restaurants, going to see movies, taking day trips. Our relationship blossomed. I was also redefining my idea of family. I poured my energy into my friendships, nurturing the relationships with people who offered mutual respect and support. I reconnected with cousins I hadn't seen in years, people who were happy for my success and didn't treat me like a resource. I also found a new place for my generosity. I remembered the broken aquamarine earring, a symbol of a milestone I had earned. I decided to honor that. I found a local charity that provided scholarships and mentorship to bright young girls from low-income families, girls who were hungry for the opportunities that Olivia had taken for granted. I set up a recurring monthly donation. It was for $1,000. It felt right. The money that had once funded deceit and entitlement was now going to lift up girls who truly deserved a chance. I was investing in a future again, but this time, it felt pure and hopeful. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my sister and my niece. Maybe one day, years from now, a genuine apology will come. Maybe it won't. But I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, trust, and love. It's about who shows up for you, who cheers for you, and who values you as a person, not as a provider. By cutting the financial cord, I did more than just protect my bank account. I reclaimed my self-respect. I taught myself that it's okay to walk away from people, even family, who hurt you. I learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to let people face the consequences of their own actions. My family is smaller now, but it's also stronger, healthier, and built on a foundation of truth. And that's a legacy worth far more than any designer earring.